Over the centuries, the Bible's remarkable stories have formed the basis of monotheism. In previous episodes, we saw the role played by the patriarchs and by the Exodus and the Law. Questions were raised about Joshua's conquest of Canaan, and the importance of King David and King Solomon was reconsidered. This time, our archaeological quest is aimed at establishing the origins of a people. Who is this people that the Bible calls the children of Israel? Where did they come from? Our archaeological investigation is going to take us on the path of another Genesis, that of the authors of a book that formed the basis of one religion, Judaism, and then went on to inspire two others, Christianity and Islam, the three religions devoted to a single God. Tel Megiddo. This archaeological site will once again provide some keys to the authors of the Bible. The 25 strata found at the site cover 7,000 years of the history of Canaan. Will it allow us to find clues to the origins of the Israelites? Our two investigators, Israel Finkelstein and Neil Silberman, are writing a book that uses archaeological tools to re-examine the Bible's stories. The issue of the origin of the Israelites is at the heart of their investigation. In previous episodes, it was shown that the Exodus, the flight from Egypt, had left no trace, and that the land of Canaan was never conquered in military terms. So where do the Israelites come from? What approach should we take to our investigation? The Museum of Cairo contains a stele that describes a military campaign led by Pharaoh Merneptah against Canaan. It contains a crucial piece of information.
The princes are prostrate, saying mercy. Plundered is Canaan with every evil. Carried off is Ashkelon. Seized upon is Gezir. Yanoam is made as that which does not exist. Israel is destroyed, and its seed is no more. All lands together they are pacified. The only indication that the Merneptah stele provides as to the nature of this population named Israel is that the hieroglyphics contain the symbols for man and woman, and the three lines indicating a plural. In other words, it refers to a semi-nomadic group that has not settled down, that does not live in a city. It's a group that moves around without a particular territory, and that is all we know.
The stele dates from the very end of the 13th century, 1207 BC. a concrete starting point in our quest for the people of Israel. Historians tell us that at the time the stele was erected, Canaan was organized around city-states under the domination of Egypt. In the strata of the Megiddo site corresponding to this period, the remains of a flourishing city have been found. During the whole of the 13th and 14th centuries, Megiddo was apparently a prosperous Canaan city, but suddenly, in around 1130 BC, it was destroyed. A layer of carbonized debris that is clearly visible in many areas of the site attests to the violence of the event that caused this destruction.
Megiddo is only one piece of evidence in a much bigger picture of the destruction of Canaanite culture. Other places were also put to the torch: Hatzor, Lachish, Bethel, and Megiddo. However, not in the same time. Some of them came down in the 13th century. Others survived a little bit. Some of them were destroyed in the 12th century BC. It took about a century until all of them were put to the torch. Who did it then? And why?
If we broaden our perspective, we can see that the entire Levant region underwent an intensely troubled period at the time. Egypt was no longer the power of bygone days and had lost its far-off colonies one by one. The Hittites, who controlled Asia Minor and the north of Syria, disappeared, as did the Mycenaean civilization and its monuments. As for the Levant city-states, they were swept away. The Canaan landscape was radically transformed. How did this happen? Cuneiform tablets discovered in the port city of Ugarit in Syria, which was itself destroyed at the time, provide the first elements of an explanation. These texts attest to a climate of fear and confusion. When deciphered, they provide evidence of the causes of this upheaval. Amurapi, the last king of Ugarit, wrote to the king of Alashia, today's Cyprus, "Father, the enemy's ships have come, burning our cities and sowing destruction everywhere." Which formidable enemy was capable of overturning the ancient world in this way? Who were these invaders who came from the sea? The archaeologist Ayelet Gilboa is excavating a site on the north coast of Tel Aviv. She puts forward the explanation that is most widely accepted by the experts.
One of the main, probably, outcomes are what we call the movements of the sea peoples, which are still, after about 100 years of research, a very mysterious group of people. Most people think that they came from somewhere in the west, maybe Greece, maybe Anatolia, which is west to us, possibly Cyprus, and settled in our region on the coast of the Levant. Now, among these people, the most celebrated, the most famous ones are the Philistines. We all know the Philistines from the Bible. But there were many groups of sea people. We know them name by name from the Egyptian records, mainly from the Egyptian records, from some Canaanite records too. Among them, again, there were many, but were such people as Sikila, Shardana, Luka, Ekwesh, and many other names, which are very hard to define archaeologically.
What can we learn from the Canaan and Egyptian sources? In Medinet Habu in Upper Egypt, a monumental inscription dating from Ramses III describes attacks carried out by unknown invaders. The carvings show a military campaign and a naval battle, capsized boats, archers, men fallen into the sea. Egypt's adversaries are clearly depicted. They are wearing plumed helmets with chin straps and sometimes strange horned helmets, a visual account of the horrors of a battle. In less than 1 century, the 12th, the Sea Peoples occupied the entire coast.
It would be a mistake to understand every single destruction of a Canaanite city-state as a result of an attack by the Sea People. The entire Eastern Mediterranean was in a complete turmoil. The economy was disrupted. Maritime trade routes were cut. Ports on the Mediterranean coast were destroyed, were attacked and taken. In a situation like this of economy falling, famine, political dysfunction, then one city can attack another. A gang of people from the highlands can take a city. Pastoral nomads can come also and try to gain some advantage by attacking a single city, isolated city. Everything was in chaos.
While the city-states were collapsing one by one, another development was secretly unfolding in the highlands. At the time, the population density of the region was quite low. Its barren topography made communications difficult. It was an enclosed area, ideal for a genesis or birth. Up until the end of the 1960s, the highlands were practically terra incognita in archaeological terms. After the 1967 war, these territories were placed under Israeli administration. Exploratory missions were then carried out at the surface level by a number of archaeological teams. Researchers went over the territory, square meter by square meter, carrying out a meticulous collection at ground level of any traces of human passage or settlement. The slightest object of significance was collected and its location noted. A task that required observation, sorting, and classification, followed by analysis. Certain sites were then chosen for excavation. This type of research is based on statistical methodology. The location of remains and concentrations of fragments are transferred onto a map of the area. This enables a reconstruction of how a given territory was occupied, the size of sites, their number, and their evolution over time. In this way, the highlands were inspected with a fine-toothed comb. The results were amazing. Between the 12th and 10th centuries BC, almost 250 villages were to be found in the highlands of central Canaan. This occurred without the slightest trace of a military conquest. It was a social transformation that was gradual, but nevertheless radical.
So what we see here is the map, the entire map of all the surveys of many years in the highlands from south to north. This map itself is extremely important, but there is one more step to take, and that is to show, to investigate this map on the background vis-a-vis the map of the period before and the map of the period after, and then you see the process. And this is really what's amazing, because in the late Bronze, it's very, very sparse. There are very few settlements. Altogether, in the highlands, maybe 30 or so. And then during a very short period of time, you have a wave of settlement with about 250 sites all over the area. And this is really the rise of early Israel.
Why can we call them the first Israelites? What characterizes this population which appeared in the highlands? The layout of their villages, which is very different from villages in the lowlands, provides a first clue. These villages were oval in shape. Animal husbandry was the principal activity of the inhabitants. A completely enclosed area was used to corral herds and protect them during the night. But why were these villages oval? This configuration is similar to that of the Bedouins described by the first explorers who entered the Judean and Transjordan deserts. Were the inhabitants of the highlands former pastoral nomads? Did they exchange their tents for permanent shelters? And if so, why? Israel Finkelstein finally seems to have identified a lead in his investigation of the origins of the Israelites. But in order to go further, he has to take into account ethnographic and ethno-archaeological data drawn from an observation of the Bedouins' current way of life.
حياك الله في وادي رم. أدري إنك تي بدوين.
Thank you.
لو سهلك تفضل.
شكرا.
عفوا.
شكرا.
The nomad's livelihood depends on a system of exchange with sedentary populations, a system that is based on certain rules. The pastoralists provide animal protein and leather, while the settled population provides cereals and other agricultural products. Cereals formed the basis of the diet of traditional societies, including those of nomadic herders. Without these grains, the Bedouins would not be able to continue their nomadic way of life. If, for whatever reason, the exchange system collapses or becomes impossible, the Bedouins would be forced to produce their own grain. But in order to do so, they would first have to settle down. What caused the collapse of the exchange system and forced the pastoral nomads to settle down in the highlands?
Remember that in the last phase of the late Bronze Age, we are entering slowly a major crisis in the entire region. Canaan, the neighboring lands, the entire Eastern Mediterranean is in a severe crisis. Empires collapse, cities are destroyed, the Egyptian administration is gone from Canaan, people are running away from the villages. In a situation like this, the villagers cannot produce enough grain for the exchange with the pastoral nomads, and the pastoral nomads have to settle down. This is exactly the moment when we see all of a sudden a wave of settlement in the highlands. In my opinion, these are the pastoral people of the late Bronze Age who now settle down because of this crisis.
Archaeology shows us that the material culture of the pastoral nomads who settled down in the highlands was not very different from that of neighboring peoples, except for one particularity that distinguishes them: their diet. In all the archaeological excavations of the highlands, no pork bones have ever been found. What can this mean? What reasons can we find to explain this oddity?
There are several reasons, possible reasons. One is that if these people came from pastoral background, of course the pastoral people do not have pigs, and this could have been one of the reasons. But I think that there is a stronger reason to the fact that there are no bones of pigs in the highlands, and that is that at the same time exactly you have the sites of the Philistines in the lowlands, and in general the sites in the lowlands, Canaanites, Philistines and others, they eat a lot of pork. So the distinction between the people of the lowlands and the people of the highlands could have been a situation of we and they. They eat pork, we don't.
But that's not all. The highlands, where a population that abstained from eating pork settled, were not a homogeneous territory. In the south, vegetation was scarce and rainfall uncertain. The arid soil prevented any real development of agriculture. The environment in the north was quite different. More abundant water sources and fertile valleys meant that a cereal-based agriculture was able to develop. Not only cereals, but also olive trees and grapevines. The many remains of presses that have been found in the area provide evidence of a developed agricultural system and one of the most lucrative of activities, the production of oil and wine. The villages situated on these trading routes became more and more wealthy and developed into cities. Two different ecosystems explain the emergence of these two distinct entities. One in the north, which would become the Kingdom of Israel, and the other in the south, which would become the Kingdom of Judah. Archaeology has searched in vain for a trace of the unified kingdom of David and Solomon as described in the Bible. Did such a kingdom ever exist? Neil Silberman and Israel Finkelstein have analyzed the data from remains found in Canaan and in bordering regions. Two inscriptions in particular have shed light on the subject. The Mesha stele, on display in the Louvre, was discovered by an Alsatian missionary in South Jordan in 1868. The inscription advises that it was erected by King Mesha of Moab in order to thank the god Chemosh for a victory against the kingdom of Israel. This stele contains the name of Omri, king of Israel. It dates from the 9th century BC. Another stele from the same period was discovered in 1993 in the north of Israel. It states that King Hazael of Damascus killed the king of Israel, Jehoram, and the king of Judah, Ahaziah, of the house of David. These inscriptions clearly distinguish between two kingdoms, Israel and Judah. There is no mention of a single kingdom. Nevertheless, the Bible attributes a common religion to these two kingdoms, that of Yahweh. What do we know about this religion? It is difficult to reconstitute the vision that a people had of their gods through archaeology. Difficult, but not impossible. Excavations carried out in different sites in both the north and the south have unearthed a range of objects of worship. Fertility goddesses, companions of gods, and animal incarnations of the divinities. They are to be found both in Canaanite sites from the Bronze Age and in sites from the Israelite era in the Iron Age.
We have very, very little information about the religion. One of them I published, I found once in a kibbutz in Galilee, not far from here, Kibbutz Shamir. I visited and I found on a shelf there a bronze figure of a bull. And I asked where this bull was found. It's very nice. It's about 18 centimeters long, beautiful bull. They said a member of the kibbutz, he was a soldier, he was in training in the northern Samaria hills. He found it on a hill. The bull is the symbol, of course, of Baal, the god, the main god of Canaan, and also of El, the chief god, you know, the chief god of the Canaanite pantheon. But also is related to the Israelite god, especially in the northern part of the country. The bull, you know, the golden calves, they are the major symbols of the temples of Dan and Bet El during the Israelite period. There is a lot of continuity between Canaanite and Israelite religion.
What do we know about Yahweh? Certain biblical verses refer to a god from the southern desert, worshipped with more or less the same fervor in the north and the south. How well did Yahweh, the god of the south, and El or Baal, gods from the north, coexist? Quite well if we go by the evidence of remains found throughout the land. However, the Bible refers to a conflict. The well-known incident of the golden calf that occurred when Moses went up Mount Sinai to receive the tablets of the law from Yahweh. While Moses was going up to the mountaintop, the people waiting in the valley made a golden calf. As in other similar passages in the Old Testament, the idol was ultimately destroyed and Yahweh triumphed. What did this conflict between divinities and this victory of Yahweh represent? What historical reality did it reflect? Is there archaeological evidence for the existence of the worship of Yahweh in the kingdom of Judah? In the Museum of Israel in Jerusalem, we can see two amulets dating from about 600 BC, discovered southwest of the old city of Jerusalem. These pieces are covered in an archaic Hebrew text which says, "May Yahweh bless and keep you. May Yahweh shine his face upon you." It is the oldest text ever discovered that is similar to a biblical verse.
It's clear that Yahweh was the national God. Yahweh was worshipped like a national god, just as the Ammonites worshipped Milcom. The Moabites worshipped Chemosh, and so on. But worshipping a national god does not exclude the worship of other divinities. On the contrary, the national god is important for the protection of the people in leading the king and his people to war. But when it comes to matters of fertility, for example, or storms, other gods can be called on. For fertility, it's primarily goddesses. You have to imagine that in Judah, there was a small pantheon surrounding Yahweh, which was also undoubtedly the case in Israel.
Let us now review the situation. In 722 BC, Assyrian armies annihilated the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of the north, causing an influx of refugees into Judah. At the same time, Judah's economy was developing, and this small kingdom became a genuine state. 1 century after the fall of the kingdom of Israel, the king of Judah, Josiah, took advantage of the decline of the Assyrian Empire to envisage the conquest of the territories in the north. The refugees from the kingdom of the north brought with them their traditions and religions. However, Josiah's plan was based on a united people, a single nation. Josiah's plan was carried out in steps. First of all, he discovered a book that was attributed to Moses and united the population around the laws it contained. Leaving aside the historicity of this event, it is believed that the book in question was the fifth book of the Bible, Deuteronomy.
One of the most important ideas in the book of Deuteronomy is the idea of the centralization of the cult. And it says that all the people of Israel must worship one God and one God only in one place. So it's one nation worshiping one God in a single temple.
The second step of the reform involved eradicating any competing religions in order to unite the people around a single God. Finally, the third step involved elaborating a common history by combining the traditions of the north with those of the south. Is it possible to find traces in the field of Josiah's reform, proof that this centralization of religion in Jerusalem occurred? The Temple of Arad in the Negev, constructed in the 8th century BC, is located inside a fortress. The temple was destroyed at the end of the 8th century and was never rebuilt. It was constructed on the model of temples that had been erected in Canaan for centuries, a model going back to the late Bronze Age. In the internal courtyard, which was open to the public, we find the sacrificial area. The courtyard gives on to a sanctuary reserved for priests only. Beyond that, the Holy of Holies, with 2 altars and 2 vertical stones, representing what the Bible enigmatically calls the Matzeva. This temple is a place of worship like those that existed outside of Jerusalem in the 8th century.
If what we think about this temple is correct, we have a very interesting situation of a difference between the 8th and 7th centuries BC. In the 8th century, we have temples in various places in Judah, including this one of Arad behind me, Beersheba, which is not far from here, and other places. Whereas in the 7th century, they all disappear. And we have the temple in Jerusalem.
The Bible sets out Josiah's declaration to the elders of Judah and of Jerusalem. We will now turn to one element of the story, which is based on a book.
The fact that they said a book had been found, which means that it was an ancient book that was lost somewhere in the temple, obviously legitimated the reform. But at the same time, it also shows that the redefinition of the Judaite religion was now going to be based on a book. The book was going to become the basis of a new religion. So it's not just the fact that a book was found, but there's the whole issue of the status and importance of that book, which it didn't have before.
In order to pursue our investigation, we have to examine a central question, that of writing. What do we know about the beginnings of writing in this region? In which circumstances did writing become important in the society of ancient Israel? Did the Israelites know how to read and write in the 7th century BC? Here again, we have to look to archaeology for the answers. In the 7th century sites, we have discovered many seals and ostraka, fragments of pottery that contain inscriptions. In the 8th century, they are very rare. Before that, they are quite simply non-existent. These brief texts deal with economic or administrative questions. Written by scribes, they provide evidence of the development and centralization of Judah, which was then an Assyrian vassal. This corresponds to a well-known phenomenon. The emergence of a state is generally accompanied by the spread of writing. In an Ostrakhan of the 7th century, a laborer complains to the authorities about the theft of a garment. In what way does this text provide proof of a revolution?
Before the 7th century BC, it's clear that the ancient Israelites were not literate. As a matter of fact, what we would say is that literacy wasn't even a category that people thought about. It wasn't an important idea in society. Beginning in the 7th century, writing spreads through all classes of Israelite society. We see writing by tomb cutters, by officers in the army, by workmen. Variety of different kinds of people throughout society are writing and apparently reading as well. And the spread of writing in ancient Israel at this time indicates that writing at least had a beginnings of literacy in Israel. And of course, this beginnings of literacy will be critical to the emergence of a sacred, written, and authoritative text.
Writing had just expanded beyond the circle of scribes. Of course, public readings of the book discovered in the temple do not prove the degree of literacy of the population of Judah. But they do show the function that the written word had attained in 7th century society. In the small state of Judah, under the reign of Josiah, a revolution had been launched.
The fact that a sacred written text emerged from a pastoral agrarian society is a watershed of Western civilization. Never before in human history had societies had sacred texts that were authoritative. Most Near Eastern civilizations had texts only for governments, for writing. Authority, cultural authority, religious authority was passed from family to family through oral tradition. It wasn't passed by reading texts or appealing to the authority of text. The first time in human history that we have the authority of human texts is with the Josianic religious reforms, where they appeal to the authority of a written text and have that written text as a binding authority for the entire culture, for all people, as opposed to the authority of the family and the tradition. And this is a watershed of Western civilization.
In the 7th century BC, everything merges. Everything is ripe for something new. When we look at the politics of the time, the economy of the time, the social situation in Judah, even the fact that literacy spreads from the center to the countryside, to the villages, to the relatively simple people. What we see is a situation in which Judah puts everything in the written word, in a book. Judah describes its past, mythical or historical. It tells us about the present, and it gives us the dreams for the future in the shape of the written word, of a book. And this is something new in the history of the human adventure.
Based on this legitimacy founded on a common law and history, Josiah was able to lead the population in his ambitious plan. But the dream of a great kingdom that would unite the people of Israel and Judah for the first time ever was not to be. Josiah died before he was able to accomplish it, killed by Pharaoh Necho II. His end is related in the Bible in a few lines. And the worst was yet to come. In 597 BC, the Babylonians wreaked havoc in the kingdom of Judah for the first time. "11 years later, Nebuchadnezzar marched on Jerusalem. The temple of Yahweh was burned down. Jerusalem was laid to ruins. Judah was erased from the map. A significant portion of the rural population was maintained in Judah under the yoke of Babylonia. In line with imperial policy, some of the inhabitants were exiled to Babylon. The last king of the house of David, Zedekiah, was also exiled, his sons slaughtered. The elite of the cities, the priests and the scribes, were banished to the banks of the Tigris and the Euphrates. book of Psalms laments that by the rivers of Babylon we sat down and wept.
The situation of exile is in fact a situation of huge crisis because all the pillars on which the identity of a people were based no longer existed. There was no more temple, there was no more king, there was no more country, there was no more territorial unity. So in order to survive, it was necessary to find other means of constructing an identity. It was in fact those who were exiled, the scribes, the priests, who constructed that identity, taking up a certain number of earlier traditions, but opening those traditions out. That is, Josiah's reform would become the symbol of the temple which was transformed into a synagogue. Little by little, Moses would replace the king, and the Torah would replace the country. Through this work of writing and rewriting, Judaism would be invented in the concrete form that it took during the Persian era, notably under Ezra the priest.
Biblical scholars have therefore suggested that the scribe Ezra gave the final touches to the Torah, the Pentateuch. We are approaching our conclusion. What have we learned from the evidence provided by the mounds, the broken vases, and the ancient inscriptions? We are at the theology department of the University of Lausanne. Israel Finkelstein is going to meet with Thomas Romer. The time when archaeologists took the Bible literally and when textual research ignored material evidence is past.
And for you, has these new revelations of archaeology, have they changed something?
I think we have to distinguish between the final form of the Bible, which has become the basis not only of Judaism, but for the three monotheistic religions, and the origins of the Hebrew Bible. What I think is important is this question of origins. It's no longer about the wanderings of Abraham or David. The most significant change is the realization that there was a political will at work at the origins. Let me turn your question around. How do you see the Hebrew Bible? How would you define it?
In a way, I started feeling closer to the authors of the text because I sensed more their needs and their frustrations and their the problems that they faced and so on. So first of all, I would say that I feel closer to the text, and it gave me a better sense of my own identity, both as an Israeli and as a Jew, and also as a member of the wider community, you can call it Western civilization or Judeo-Christian or whatever. So on both sides. Mm-hmm.
For many years, our only knowledge of the Bible came from the Bible itself. But modern archaeology has suggested a new approach, an attempt to understand the stories of the Bible in terms of their political, geographical, historical, and cultural contexts. What was at stake when the biblical text was put into writing was the invention of a lineage, the establishment of a law, and the affirmation of a messianic promise. All of that was linked to a book which, in exile, became a portable nation, a land that could be copied, studied, passed on, and celebrated. This day of the Jewish calendar is called Simchat Torah, the rejoicing of the Torah, or celebration of the book. As a result of events that were not foreseen by the protagonists, these pillars would become the foundation of Judaism. But that is another story.